In the final days of the Second World War, as Berlin collapsed beneath the thunder of artillery and the empire of a madman crumbled into dust, a group of Allied soldiers stumbled upon something wholly unexpected. Beneath the ruins of a city, gasping its last breaths in a dimly lit bunker room, they found not blueprints for new weapons, not coded orders of extermination, but art, gentle, wistful sketches, watercolors of cottages, lovers, and woodland scenes, and among them a small portfolio of Disney drawings, Mickey Mouse, Snow White, rendered with meticulous care by the hand of Adolf Hitler himself. It was a discovery that felt impossible to reconcile. The man whose name had become synonymous with cruelty and destruction had once spent quiet hours perfecting the curve of a cartoon mouse's smile. The soldiers reportedly stood in silence, unsure whether to laugh, scoff, or feel unease. Because in that moment, the myth cracked, the mask of absolute evil fell away, and something far more disquieting emerged. A reminder that even the darkest figures in history once dreamed, once hoped, once reached for beauty. For centuries, we've learned history as a theater of heroes and villains, a moral ledger where virtue and wickedness stand neatly opposed. But reality rarely obeys such simplicity. The monsters of the past did not rise from the earth fully formed. They were shaped, slowly, by disappointment, rejection, ideology, and the strange seduction of power. The hidden sketches, the private diaries, the whispered confessions, all of them whisper a more troubling truth. Evil, when stripped of myth, often begins in the same emotional soil as everything else human: longing, loneliness, and the desire to matter. That discovery in Berlin was not just about Hitler's art. It was a mirror held up to history itself. Because when we peer into that vault, we do not only find him, we find the uncomfortable reflection of our own potential for contradiction. The same hands that create can destroy. The same mind that imagines paradise can conceive hell. This is not an invitation to pity or to forgive. It is an excavation into the psychological ruins of infamy, a search for the fragile human beginnings of monstrous ambition. For within those hidden rooms and forgotten sketches lies a question that history dares us to face. If evil can wear the face of humanity, how well do we truly know ourselves? History, as we inherit it, is not a neutral record. It is an edifice carefully constructed, brick by selective brick. What survives in textbooks, documentaries, and memorials is not the whole truth, but what institutions, victors, and even the damned themselves have chosen to preserve. Every omission, every silence serves a purpose. It's not just what we remember that defines the past, but what we are encouraged or forbidden to forget. The architecture of secrecy begins with self-preservation. Dictators, monarchs, revolutionaries all understood that power depends as much on myth as on control. To rule effectively, one must curate one's image, prune the unwanted truths, and seal away the contradictions that might invite doubt. Stalin, who demanded absolute devotion, surrounded himself with shelves of romantic poetry and metaphysical philosophy, books that revealed a man who once sought transcendence through beauty and thought. But such tenderness had no place in the machinery of terror he built. It had to be hidden, entombed beneath the concrete of propaganda. So too with Hitler, whose propaganda empire presented him as ascetic, invincible, and divinely destined. Nowhere in the glowing portraits of the Führer do we find mention of his fragile body, racked by dependence on daily injections of amphetamines and opiates from his personal physician, Theodore Morel. Nor do we see the portrait of a man haunted by the death of his niece, Gélie Raubal, whose apparent suicide left him in emotional ruins. These truths were incompatible with the myth of the iron-willed Messiah. To maintain control, he had to hide his own humanity. But secrecy was never the work of tyrants alone. Families, governments, and later historians all contributed to the architecture. Napoleon's epileptic seizures, known only to a handful of his aides, were erased to preserve the image of infallible genius. The mystic Rasputin was cast as a demonic corrupter of the Russian throne, when in truth his strange hold over the Tsarina came from something tragically human. His hypnotic ability to calm the Tsarevich's bleeding episodes, a desperate mother's faith, misread as madness. Such details disturb the simplicity of history's morality plays. They make it harder to see evil as something foreign, and easier to recognize it as a distorted echo of our own impulses. That discomfort is precisely why these secrets were buried. Because if we admit that even the cruelest figures were once vulnerable, wounded, or sincere, we are forced to confront a terrifying idea that monstrousness is not an alien condition, but a potential within the human spectrum. To excavate these hidden truths, then, is not to absolve. It is to see clearly. Every concealed letter, every sanitized biography, every missing page in the archive is part of a deliberate construction meant to shield us from complexity. But history's greatest danger lies in those smooth, unbroken surfaces. For beneath them, beneath the polished myths, runs the foundation of our collective denial. The fear that, in the right circumstances, the architecture of secrecy might just be our own. In the grand halls of Soviet history, Joseph Stalin stands as an unyielding silhouette. Cold, calculating, impenetrable, the architect of fear, the man whose gaze could dictate life or death. Yet behind the iron facade lay a private world of grief, longing, and sentimentality, so at odds with his public image that even those closest to him refused to believe it existed. For beneath the machinery of terror beat a heart that once loved deeply and was never able to love the same way again. Before the name Stalin became synonymous with tyranny, there was Yosef Jugashvili, a young Georgian revolutionary and poet who fell hopelessly in love with Kato Svanidze. A seamstress from Tiflis, she softened him, tamed him, and briefly pulled him toward the warmth of ordinary happiness. But in 1907, when she died of typhus shortly after giving birth to their son, something inside him calcified. To a close friend, he confessed, "This creature softened my heart of stone. She died, and with her died my last warm feelings for humanity." From that moment, he would wear his pain like armor, transforming love into ideology, tenderness into control. Decades later, long after the revolution had devoured its children, Stalin still kept a small apartment hidden from the party elite, a modest, unremarkable space filled with relics of the past. On the walls hung faded photographs of Cato, every year, on the anniversary of her death. He returned there alone, drinking until the room blurred, whispering to the memory of the woman who had once made him human. His guards never followed. His secretaries never dared ask. It was the one place in Moscow where the dictator's myth dissolved, and only the widower remained. Yet Stalin's private sorrows were as cruelly compartmentalized as his politics. His relationship with his children revealed a man trapped between love and brutality. When his eldest son, Yakov, tried to end his life after Stalin publicly humiliated him, his father's response was merciless. He can't even shoot straight. Years later, when Yakov was captured by the Germans, they offered to exchange him for a high-ranking Nazi prisoner. Stalin refused. "I will not trade a private for a field marshal." But when news came of Yakov's death in a concentration camp, the unbreakable man broke. His secretary recalled that he locked himself in his study for 2 days, emerging pale and silent, his eyes swollen from weeping. He never spoke of Yakov again. Only with his daughter Svetlana did glimpses of tenderness return. He called her Little Sparrow and filled their letters with jokes, affectionate scoldings, and paternal warmth. In private, he adored her. In public, he remained the generalissimo, signing execution orders, even as he kept her childish drawings pinned to his office wall. These contradictions do not redeem him. They indict him further. They reveal that the capacity for atrocity does not require the absence of feeling, only its fragmentation. Stalin SS tragedy, perhaps humanity S tragedy, is that love and cruelty can inhabit the same heart without ever touching. And in that chasm between tenderness and terror, history's darkest shadows take shape. In the quiet suburbs of Wichita, Kansas, evil wore khakis and a tucked-in shirt. Dennis Rader, husband, father, church council president, Boy Scout troop leader, was the kind of man who waved to his neighbors, mowed his lawn on weekends, and once helped a widow fix her fence. There was nothing remarkable about him, and that was precisely what made him so terrifying. Between 1974 and 1991, while America imagined its serial killers as shadowy drifters and loners, Rader was hiding in plain sight. He was the BTK killer, bind, torture, kill, a title he gave himself, a name both method and confession. For over 3 decades, Rader managed to sustain 2 parallel lives that seemed incapable of coexistence. By day, he wrote parking citations as a municipal compliance officer and led his family in prayer before dinner. By night, he slipped into the private world of sadistic fantasy that he documented with almost clerical precision. Handwritten journals, crime scene sketches, and self-photographs in bondage, all meticulously filed in a crawl space beneath his home. The very neatness of it, the methodical structure, mirrored the same bureaucratic orderliness that defined his professional life. Evil, in Rader's case, was not chaotic. It was organized, systematized, managed like a portfolio. Those who knew him never doubted his decency. His wife, Paula, later said she never once suspected. Neighbors recalled his politeness, his punctuality, his small-town helpfulness. He coached Little League, organized potlucks, attended Sunday service with unwavering devotion. But inside his mind, a darker sermon was always playing. He fantasized not about violence as spectacle, but violence as ritual, carefully choreographed, rehearsed, revisited in imagination like a performance he could control completely. He relived each act through souvenirs, trophies from his victims cataloged in labeled folders, arranged with the same precision he used for church records. When investigators finally cornered him in 2005, it wasn't a let's through a dramatic chase, but through a digital breadcrumb, a floppy disk traced back to his church computer. And when he confessed, there was no anguish, no remorse, no theatrical attempt at redemption. His tone was flat, procedural, almost bureaucratic. He spoke of strangulations and bindings as if he were describing a maintenance report. To the detectives in the room, the horror was not only in what he had done, but in how calmly he could recount it. The BTK case shatters one of our most comforting illusions, that evil must look extraordinary. We imagine it lurking in alleyways marked by visible madness or menace, but Raider's life tells a colder truth. That monstrosity can thrive behind a front door identical to our own, within routines so ordinary they lull us into blindness. His secret wasn't just the murders. It was the ordinariness that made them possible. Evil, it turns out, does not always roar. Sometimes it smiles politely across a church pew, asks about your family, and waves goodbye as you pull out of the driveway, hiding perfectly in the architecture of the everyday. History remembers Napoleon Bonaparte as the embodiment of willpower, a man whose intellect and ambition seemed to defy human limitation. The small Corsican who rose to command empires, to crown himself emperor, to redraw the map of Europe with his own hand. But beneath the legend of unstoppable conquest lay a secret that gnawed at his strength, one so mundane it seems almost absurd in contrast to his myth. Napoleon, the Titan of battle, was undone not by armies or alliances, but by his own body. From his private correspondence and his physician's notes, a pattern emerges. Letters filled with complaints of fatigue, sleeplessness, and an affliction he could never publicly admit. He suffered from debilitating hemorrhoids and a probable hormonal disorder that left him prone to swelling, mood swings, and episodes of exhaustion. In the marble statues and heroic portraits, we see his hand tucked elegantly into his waistcoat, the symbol of control. In truth, it was a gesture of pain. His fingers pressed discreetly against his abdomen, hiding spasms that could strike without warning. The empire he built on discipline and precision was quietly undermined by frailty. At Waterloo in 1815, the most decisive day of his life, multiple eyewitnesses reported that Napoleon could barely sit in the saddle. He rose late that morning, unable to mount his horse for hours, and delegated early tactical decisions to his generals, an unthinkable departure from his usual command style. The emperor, who once surveyed battlefields with icy clarity, remained confined to his tent, sweating, grimacing, dosed heavily with laudanum to dull the pain. Historians have long debated his mistakes that day. Why he delayed his attack, why he underestimated Wellington's defense, why he failed to adapt. The answer may not lie in grand strategy, but in something brutally human. A man too ill to think, too proud to admit weakness. Even earlier, during the disastrous Russian campaign of 1812, contemporaries described a Napoleon unrecognizable from the one who had stormed through Europe. His aides noted his sudden irritability, his fits of lethargy, and his growing detachment as his army froze and starved. One general wrote that the emperor's fire had dimmed. He looked through men as though they were ghosts. His valet later revealed nights spent pacing the floor in agony, sleepless and silent, refusing to let anyone see the conqueror's body betray him. His physicians, terrified of losing favor, hid the extent of his illness from the court. When we strip away the myth, a different Napoleon emerges, not the master of destiny, but its victim. His brilliance never vanished, but it faltered under the weight of pain and medication. And in that faltering, history shifted course. Perhaps the most humbling truth is this: the fate of empires can hinge on something as small as a pulse of pain, a trembling hand, a dose too strong. Napoleon's downfall reminds us that history, as get great men, are still made of fragile flesh, and sometimes the cracks in their bodies open the chasms through which entire civilizations fall. He entered history as a caricature of corruption, a bearded peasant from Siberia who slithered into the heart of the Russian Empire and brought it to ruin. Grigory Rasputin, the mad monk, the seducer of noble women, the demonic puppet master whispering in the Tsarina's ear. His name became shorthand for moral decay and mystical manipulation. But hidden beneath the scandal, the legend, and the murder in a St. Petersburg cellar lies a far stranger and more revealing truth. Rasputin's power may not have been mystical at all. It may have been medical. The story begins with a dying boy. Tsarevich Alexei Romanov, heir to the throne of Russia, suffered from hemophilia, a genetic disorder that prevented his blood from clotting. The slightest injury could mean days of agony, even death. The empire's best physicians, armed with early 20th century science, could do little more than prescribe rest and aspirin, a decision that unknowingly made everything worse. Aspirin thins the blood. It intensified Alexei's bleeding, prolonging his suffering. Then came Rasputin, untrained, unlettered, dismissed by the imperial court as a dangerous mystic. He did something radical. He told the doctors to stop. He forbade medications, insisted the boy be left in peace, and prayed softly at his bedside, sometimes holding the child's hand for hours. To the horrified aristocracy, this looked like superstition. To modern medical eyes, it was something else entirely. By removing aspirin and reducing the child's stress, Rasputin had unknowingly followed principles of hemophilia management that wouldn't be scientifically validated until decades later. Eyewitness accounts described the Tsarevich's bleeding subsiding within hours of Rasputin's visits. Some doctors thought it coincidence, others whispered of black magic, but declassified medical analyses from the 1990s suggest that Rasputin's methods, calm, suggestion, rest, had genuine physiological effects. His presence lowered the boy's anxiety, which in turn lowered his blood pressure, slowing internal bleeding. What looked like divine healing may have been the instinctive practice of psychosomatic medicine. And then there is hypnosis. Modern psychologists who studied Rasputin's interactions with the Romanovs propose that his prayers were, in fact, a form of hypnotic suggestion, soothing, rhythmic, and deeply personal. He didn't cast spells. He induced calm. The Tsarina, desperate for her son's survival, interpreted this as divine intervention. The court, terrified of a peasant's influence, saw only corruption. His letters, unsealed after the fall of the Soviet Union, reveal not a demonic manipulator, but a man deeply preoccupied with faith, pain, and compassion. He wrote to Alexandra with tenderness, calling Alexei the suffering one God loves most. He asked for no power, only that the child be spared from doctors who do not understand the soul. The tragedy is that Rasputin's genuine, if accidental, healing ability became the seed of his destruction. The more he succeeded, the more he was hated. The aristocracy could not abide the idea that salvation might come through a peasant. And so, the truth was buried beneath rumor and assassination. History turned the healer into a monster. Yet his secret, his intuitive grasp of calm and care, reminds us that the miraculous is sometimes nothing more than the ordinary seen clearly, long before science gives it a name. Before he was the Führer, before his voice thundered through stadiums and his shadow fell across a continent, Adolf Hitler was a man consumed by a secret so intimate and volatile, it nearly destroyed him. Her name was Geli Raubal, his half-niece, the daughter of his half-sister, Angela. When she moved into his Munich apartment in 1929, She was 21, radiant, impulsive, and full of life. He was 40, already wielding dangerous charisma, already intoxicated by control. What unfolded between them over the next 2 years was the dark nucleus of Hitler's most personal obsession, a relationship that, had it been exposed fully, might have rewritten the course of history. Geli was the only person known to have held genuine emotional power over him. Witnesses described her as the one figure who could tease him, contradict him, even defy him in public. But behind closed doors, their relationship was suffocating. Hitler forbade her from seeing other men, monitored her letters, and flew into jealous fits whenever she mentioned leaving Munich. Friends noticed bruises on her arms. His chauffeur later recalled violent arguments, her desperate attempts to escape his possessiveness, and her growing despair within the gilded cage of his apartment. On September 18, 1931, it all reached a breaking point. Neighbors heard shouting, a door slammed, and then silence. Hitler stormed out for a political meeting in Nuremberg. Hours later, Geli was found dead in her room, shot in the chest with Hitler's own Walter pistol. The official verdict was suicide, but the evidence told a murkier story. The bullet's trajectory was odd for self-infliction. There were marks on her face and body suggesting a struggle. The Munich police began to question Hitler's role. For a brief moment, the man who would soon command nations stood on the brink of scandal and criminal investigation. Hitler's reaction was uncharacteristically raw. He collapsed when told of her death, spoke openly of ending his own life, and retreated from public view for weeks. His confidants feared he might unravel entirely. The party's senior members, sensing weakness, whispered about removing him as leader. The press seized on the rumors, the unnatural relationship between Hitler and his niece, the whispers of abuse, the suppressed police files. For several weeks, Hitler's career teetered on collapse, but power, even embryonic, protects itself. The police investigation was quietly sealed, witnesses were silenced, and the Nazi Party rallied to contain the scandal. Geli's death was reframed as a tragic suicide, a martyrdom that deepened Hitler's supposed spiritual calling. Yet the loss transformed him. His housekeeper later recalled that he kept Geli's room untouched, a shrine frozen in time. He forbade anyone to enter. He became a vegetarian soon after, explaining that meat reminded him of her corpse. The man who emerged from this grief was harder, colder, consumed by a mission that would no longer tolerate weakness or love. And so, history turned. For a brief flicker in 1931, Adolf Hitler was not inevitable. He was vulnerable, haunted, and nearly finished. Had his rivals acted, had the scandal not been buried, the nightmare that followed, the camps, the invasions, the millions lost, might never have unfolded. The secret of Geli Raubal is not just a personal tragedy. It is the hinge upon which an era might have turned, and didn't. Ernesto Che Guevara's face is everywhere, on T-shirts, murals, protest banners, and coffee mugs, a distilled symbol of rebellion against oppression and capitalist excess. But behind that familiar image lies a series of secrets that fracture the myth and expose the contradictions at the heart of his legacy. Guevara, the self-styled champion of the poor, was born not into hardship but privilege. An upper-middle-class Argentine family with deep aristocratic lineage and cultural refinement. He grew up surrounded by books, servants, and comfort, an upbringing far removed from the peasants he later claimed to represent. Even as he embraced Marxist ideals and preached revolutionary austerity, Guevara's private life told another story. He collected fine literature, dined on imported delicacies, and enjoyed the cigars that became his trademark, even while ordinary Cubans stood in ration lines. Declassified Cuban state records and eyewitness accounts from his comrades reveal that he maintained access to luxury goods throughout the revolution, privileges rationalized as necessary for his health and mission efficiency. His asthma, often cited as justification for these exceptions, became a convenient shield for indulgences his followers could never afford. More troubling are the beliefs unearthed in his own journals. In passages later published by his family, Che wrote of black Cubans as indolent and lazy, and described indigenous South Americans as childlike and primitive. These words sit uneasily beside his later calls for racial equality in revolutionary movements, suggesting a man whose worldview was shaped as much by class prejudice as by ideology. Yet the most damning revelation lies not in his words, but in his actions. As head of Cuba's prisons and later its industrial ministry, Guevara oversaw the creation of re-education and forced labor camps, the Unidades Militares de Ayuda a la Producción, where homosexuals, religious believers, and alleged counter-revolutionaries were imprisoned without trial. Within these camps, brutality was justified as moral correction, and ideological purity was enforced through suffering. This is perhaps the greatest secret buried beneath the heroic myth, that the man celebrated as a liberator helped design a system of oppression that mirrored the very regimes he fought against. To call Guevara merely a hypocrite is to miss the deeper truth. His contradictions reflect a pattern seen in many revolutionary figures: the capacity to sincerely believe in equality while subconsciously preserving one's own privilege. Che's revolution was as much about control as liberation, and his moral absolutism often left no room for dissent or individuality. The irony is profound. The world's most commercialized anti-capitalist icon was himself a man of comfort, prejudice, and privilege. His myth endures because it offers a simple, romantic image of rebellion. His secret matters because it reminds us that even revolutions and the men who lead them can be built on the very hierarchies they claim to destroy. When the doors of history's hidden chambers close behind us, when the confessions, illnesses, addictions, and secret shames of the infamous have all been laid bare, what remains is not catharsis, but unease. The deeper we peer into the private lives of history's most notorious figures, the more disquieting the reflection becomes. Their secrets do not cleanse their deeds, nor do they redeem them. Rather, they dissolve the comfortable boundaries we draw between good and evil, between the monstrous and the human. It is tempting to think of tyrants and killers as aberrations, alien minds detached from ordinary human experience. Yet what the secret histories of Stalin, Napoleon, Rasputin, Hitler, and Guevara reveal is that the machinery of infamy is built from familiar materials: love, pain, ambition, fear, pride, and the endless human struggle for control. Stalin's affection for his daughter does not erase the millions starved by his policies. Napoleon's agony at Waterloo does not mitigate the blood spilled across Europe. Rasputin's intuitive healing does not erase the decadence that helped doom the Romanovs. These contradictions do not absolve, they indict us more deeply, because they show that the monstrous can coexist with tenderness, intellect, and sincerity. We crave simplicity in our villains. We flatten them into symbols so that their sins feel safely inhuman, their cruelty conveniently foreign to our own. But the secret archives and diaries The medical records and private letters whisper otherwise. Evil is not a mutation. It is a human possibility. The BTK killer who tucked his children into bed before murdering strangers, or Hitler mourning the niece whose death shattered him, are not aberrations of empathy, but proof of its dark elasticity. They remind us that emotional depth, even love, can coexist with horror, that the same mind capable of devotion can also justify atrocity. The greatest revelation of these hidden lives is not about the powerful themselves, but about us. We prefer the myth of the monster because it preserves our innocence. If evil is born of pathology, we are safe from it. But if it grows from the same soil as our own compromises, our vanity, our resentment, our need to be seen and obeyed, then it becomes something far more frightening, a mirror. History's notorious figures were not gods of destruction, nor demons in disguise. They were humans who let ordinary weaknesses metastasize under extraordinary circumstances. Their secrets matter because they collapse the illusion of moral distance, reminding us that the architecture of monstrosity is built brick by brick from impulses we all recognize. Understanding this truth does not absolve. It warns. If evil is not other but possible within us all, then the true defense against it is not condemnation, but vigilance, an unflinching awareness of how easily the private darkness of one life can become the public catastrophe of many. The candlelit room where our journey began remains as it was, quiet, shadowed, and filled with secrets only partially catalogued. The sketches, letters, diaries, and suppressed documents we've glimpsed are just the surface of a far deeper archive. Behind closed doors, in classified files, private correspondences, and hidden safes, countless other revelations lie waiting, fragments of lives that could reshape everything we think we know about history's most infamous figures. What we've explored is not an ending, but an invitation, an entryway into understanding how memory is constructed, narratives are controlled, and the private truths of the powerful continue to ripple through the world in ways we seldom acknowledge. Consider what these secrets reveal. Stalin's capacity for grief alongside mass murder, the BTK killer's ordinary domesticity hiding unthinkable crimes, Napoleon's suffering undermining military genius, Rasputin's accidental medical intuition, Hitler's moment of vulnerability after Gali Raubal's death, and Che Guevara's concealed privilege beneath revolutionary rhetoric. Each story challenges the simplicity of the narratives we inherit, asking us to reconsider the very nature of agency, morality, and the interplay between human frailty and historical consequence. These hidden lives force us to confront a troubling truth. Evil, power, and ambition do not exist outside humanity. They emerge from it, intertwined with ordinary desires, fears, and contradictions. But the vault is not a static collection. It is a living archive. Every revelation we unearth prompts new questions. What other secrets remain sealed in archives around the world? Which contemporary figures are shaping history while hiding truths future generations will struggle to comprehend? How do the intimate, often suppressed details of notorious lives change our understanding of the forces behind power, policy, and public catastrophe? This is where you enter the story. You are not merely a consumer of history, you are a participant in its excavation. The skill you cultivate is not memorization, but critical skepticism, the ability to ask, what does the official narrative conceal? Whose interests does it serve? What complexities are systematically erased to preserve comfort, myth, or ideology? This channel exists as a repository for those uncomfortable truths, a space where we uncover the mechanisms that drive history, where we question the polished narratives handed to us, and where a community of curious, courageous viewers confront the shadows behind infamy. If the stories you witnessed have unsettled you, if they have disturbed your assumptions, then you are ready to continue. Subscribe, because the vault remains open. Each investigation uncovers another layer of human complexity, contradiction, and hidden influence. Another revelation that reshapes our understanding of the past and ourselves. From secret scientific experiments to hidden relationships that changed wars, from suppressed evidence to the overlooked decisions of celebrated figures, the truths waiting inside history's private chambers will challenge everything you thought you knew. The vault is open, the secrets continue to emerge, and your journey into the depths of historical truth is only beginning.